Film can represent a lot of things, whether it be abstract ideas or some niche historical event that's going to be portrayed to a mainstream audience. And it continues to be used in a variety of ways to this day.
But oftentimes, film has been used as a critique or reflection of society and societal norms from whatever country it has been filmed in. In America, we have movies like Full Metal Jacket, The Joker, and others. These challenge societal norms of their eras in American history and give their grievances or critique to the norms of the time period or subject they are covering. For example, in The Joker, we see strong grievances to the inherent classism and discrimination against working-class people in America, showing how oftentimes the people at the top could give less than a shit about the average Joe who is living in squalor and is one of millions who keeps the greasy gears of society running.
We often see these themes in Western films all the time. However, a genre or region of film that we have never really seen a lot of is that of Asian films. And Asian films are honestly very interesting. They've somewhat redefined the idea of what cinema is, because they're the ones critiquing their own regional norms and societal norms that is not common or is even alien to what Western societal norms are. There's nothing about it that we have seen before in Western films. So it's fascinating to see them presented in Asian media. These concepts help to redefine Asian media and films as something compelling and totally different from that of the ideas and concepts presented in the West. In Japan, whose media is only really known for anime, has a very distinct film industry and character to their films. A prime example of this is Hanabi, which is Japanese for fireworks. It is a story of a rogue ex-cop who simply wants to have one final great journey with his wife before she dies of cancer. In the movie, he is no longer the cop he once was. He kills people, he robs a bank, and is indebted to the Yakuza. Throughout this, he says, at most, maybe, 10 to 15 lines. And this is what is interesting about Japanese filmmaking, because a lot of Japanese films have the same idea to Hanabi. It perfectly reflects Japanese ideas on film and some cultural practices. The film tells its emotion through body language and character interaction with the environment, and it makes it so much more impactful compared to something you'd see in the West, where to explain something oftentimes in major American blockbusters or other more sentimental American movies, they have to use so much language and so much dialogue that oftentimes it drowns out the impact and meaning of that scene. And that's what makes Hanabi so much more, I guess, volatile in its feelings. And this is something that you see a lot of times, well, I guess a mixture of, in that of Korea. However, Korea itself also has its own typical idea of what a film is, as they have some themes and ideas that are very distinct as their own, one of these being national realism.
National realism has the focus placed solely on the study of characters and emphasizing them as human beings and the social problems and conflicts that community and people go through.
A great example of national realism is that of Foul King. Foul King is, I guess, in some parts to say, the Korean version of Nacho Libre. But compared to Nacho Libre, it has so much more oomph and story and ambience to it than Jack Black just getting money for a church. In Foul King, we follow the journey of a man named Im Dae-ho, who is, at first, a low-level banker at the beginning of the movie. He is harassed by his boss, downtrodden by everyone, and lives with his parents still. And throughout his entire existence, he's only dreamed of one thing: wrestling, like the great wrestlers of the 50s and 60s in Korea. This idea and mythos surrounding wrestling attracts him to try and seek better, and eventually he joins up with the wrestling gym. At first pushed away by the boss of the wrestling gym, he's eventually accepted to become a heel, or the bad guy for a wrestling match. And throughout his journey, he slowly learns how to become its own man. He starts to fight back against his boss, who constantly physically harasses him. He's able to finally get this courage that he's never been able to before and ask out his crush, or at least become someone who he was never able to become before. And like National Realism, it doesn't have a happy ending. It doesn't have a bad ending. It has a neutral ending. An ending that's very open and honest and just shows that not everything has a staunch ending. It ends with him finally going on a fight with his boss. And at the very last scene, he's running up to his boss, but he slips on a patch of ice. Showing that the main character doesn't always get the girl. The main character doesn't always get revenge. But he can still make strides as a person in the real world. Val King is one of my personal favorites. And obviously, when people think of Korean film, they think of something like Parasite. But you can draw connections to both of them quite easily, as the guy that plays Im Da-ho is the same as the father in Parasite. And it shows, they're both dark comedies, they both have similar themes, but it both shows just kind of this like darker theme and downtrodden of the working class. Im Da-ho, small-time banker getting trodden on by his boss and by everyone else. In Parasite, it's a poor working class family in a small 2-bedroom apartment that has to make ends meet and eventually has to suck up to the rich people. And it's oftentimes films like these that really kind of show how dependent and really different the Asian films are. Because they aren't the stereotypical noir or action blockbuster thing you would find in something like America. Asia has those, but when they present something that's anti-war or anti-classism, they show it in their way, and it makes it so much more impactful and different as the idea of classism, the idea of humanity, all these niche concepts that are displayed in films like The Joker, as previously stated, but are made in such a different way that it makes it so unique. Aside from Korean films, we have Korea's next door neighbor, that of China. And of course, China's seen as the boogeyman nowadays, but they have a very distinct character when it comes to their films. A lot of films, Chinese films can be dissected into 3 separate groups. The mainland Chinese films, Hong Kong films, and Taiwanese films. All of these have different themes, they have different ideas, but Chinese films have a very distinct past. During the Mao era and the Cultural Revolution, films were oftentimes very repressed or very specific to show party ideology. And so not a lot of different ideas were allowed to be expressed in the film industry at that time. But when Deng Xiaoping came to power, he purposefully told filmmakers to do whatever you wish to. Criticize the Mao era. He actively wished for people to criticize the Mao era to show that China's in a changing time and it's preparing to enter the modern world. And there are a lot of newer Chinese movies that are very reflective on society or very reflective of Chinese culture, but they still link back to the older eras. A key theme in Chinese cinema is that of socialist realism. Originating from Soviet Russia during Lenin's era, it portrays the revolution and the people involved with the revolution in a positive light, showing it as a step forward into a new future. And oftentimes this can be seen in a variety of forms, not specific to socialist realism or socialist ideology, but to revolutionary ideology. And a great concept of this is what we see in that of 1911, which covers the tail end or the beginning of the Chinese Revolution and Guangzhou Uprising, with Sun Yat-sen and his followers able to take power and bring upon a new era in China and slowly starting to end the century of humiliation. Throughout the film, we see fairly accurate details to that of the ending of the Manchu dynasty and the beginning of the Chinese Republic down in Guangzhou in the Guangxi clique area. Unfortunately, in 1911, it doesn't end on a happy ending. Like in Korea, it ends on a neutral ending, but if you have historical context, you know that it's an ending of sadness and despair. Something that will lead to the horrendous Warring States period in the Second Sino-Japanese War. It ends on Sun Yat-sen giving up his presidency and giving it to General Yuan Shikai. But the events and themes presented in 1911 with the context of socialist realism presents those revolutionaries and their ideals in a positive light, showing that they are fighting for a new China, a China that will not be pushed around by Western nations, and a China that will seek to the future to become better and get out of the century of humiliation. On a less depressing note, what about Bollywood? Holy crap, Bollywood's on like another level. Bollywood is something unimaginable. It takes Hollywood, old Hollywood dance numbers and all that, and vibrant Indian culture, and just cranks it up to 11. I cannot describe how insane Bollywood is, but it's something that just brings it to its own nature, that is something that nobody else can repeat. The crazy dance numbers, the crazy action scenes, and just all these movies that have such weird and concepts that it just brings into such a great, I don't know, it's just an enigma into itself. Asian media is unique because it brings its own cultural norms and practices into its media, something that is alien and has never before been seen in the West. And that's what makes it so much, that's what basically reinvents cinema, is these new ideas and these new concepts the West and other parts of the world have never thought about, because it's their own brand. It shows how Asia and its people are diverse. They create things that just have never been seen before, and they have their own history, culture, and it just really speaks to the creativity of their people. And this is why Asian cinema has really redefined and reinvented cinema. Thank you for watching.